Afternoon, evening, afternoon. What would you say, Victoria? Afternoon, everyone.
Hello, everyone.
Thank you all for coming to the third, is it the third?
It is.
Webinar in our series of webinars looking at the LOMLOE. My name is George Heritage. I work for Cambridge Assessment English in the Assessment Services Department alongside.
Hello, my name is Victoria and I am based in Madrid.
So, Victoria,
what are we going to be looking at?
What are we looking at today?
Okay, we are going to, this is the session overview. So we are going to start by briefly talking about competencies in LOMLOE, something that we have already mentioned, covered in the previous two sessions. Then we will move on to the main focus of our session today, mediation, trying to get a better understanding of it, and also trying to have some ideas about how we are already working on mediation, how we are also assessing it, but trying to give you some more ideas.
Exactly. I mean, mediation is one of the big new areas, I think, or less familiar areas perhaps, that came in with the LOMLOE. It was added. There was a companion volume to the CEFR, how long, 2 years ago, 3 years ago?
2018.
2018, which will
3 years ago.
Which gives a much clearer outline and sort of can-do statements with regards to mediation. But I think the important thing is to remember, as Victoria said, that we're all already doing a lot of it already in class. So today we'll just be sort of picking up some of those strands and thinking about how we are already doing it and how to assess it. I'm going to turn my camera off, Victoria.
For connection. Mm-hmm.
Okay. But yeah, please keep interacting in the chat box. We'll be keeping an eye on. We also have our colleague Mark in the chat box to answer any questions we can't. So let's go. Competencies.
Yes. Well, as you may know, the LOMLOE has like 3 main pillars. Starting with key competencies, which are really like overarching all the elements of education. They are covered across all the subjects. We will talk about them in more detail in a minute. Then it also includes some competencies which are specific to subjects, and then also some saberes básicos, basic knowledge that students need to acquire. And here we can have a bit more detail of the key competencies. There are 8 of them. And as I said before, we will be working on them across all the subjects. Then we have also the specific competencies. We are going to talk about them in a minute. And then the saberes básicos, that will be decided by the autonomous regions. So watch this space for this.
So drilling down into the more specific competencies, if we're thinking from a language, from an English or foreign language point of view, reception, production, interaction, and mediation, are these really new? What do you think, Victoria?
I think we have been working on them since
hopefully,
always, yes, forever. Yes, I don't think they are new. I think we are all familiar with it.
So enabling students to communicate effectively. So with reception, we're thinking more about listening and reading, production, speaking, writing, and then interaction, mediation, plurilingualism, and the cultural competence. I think we have to look at these as a whole and then adapt them as and when to students and classes. Moving on, Victoria.
Mm-hmm. Yes, we're going to focus zooming and talk about mediation. Sorry, there were some animations here. Mediation, but first let's talk about the 4 skills, because I think this is traditionally how we have been from the teaching, learning, and assessment point of view. Traditionally, this is how we have divided language, right, George? We have always talked about speaking, listening, reading, and writing.
Exactly, and then once we get up to a slightly higher level, we do have a slightly closer look in at use of English, don't we? Which does run through all these 4 other skills as well. So, anything else, Victoria?
No, it is true that in some cases, for example, when we have a speaking exam, it is true that we are talking about production, but also interaction. So that's why, although these modes of communication that are reception, production, interaction, and mediation have always been present, I think there was a greater emphasis on them since there has been a greater emphasis since the companion volume was published in 2018, because the Council of Europe, in the Common European Framework and in the companion volume, acknowledges that we can still be talking about skills, but maybe that the modes of communication are a better way to reflect or to capture the complex reality of communication. So this is really, I think this is a very clear way to show how these modes of communication are organized. So reception with listening and reading, production with reading and writing, interaction, which involves, of course, listening to what our partner is saying, but also reacting to it. So there is reception and production, but also this reaction to what the other person is saying. And then, George, finally, mediation.
Well, then finally mediation. And again, I think this sort of is a thread that runs through any interactive communication that we're doing. And so I really like this diagram as well. I think it sits similarly to interaction, somewhere in between these skills, these modes of communication.
Yeah.
And it is harder perhaps to break it down or to identify it, let's say, perhaps because we haven't had as much experience as something like interaction. I mean, in Cambridge exams, we have the speaking criteria. One of the criteria is communicative interaction, isn't it? Is it communicative interaction?
Communicative achievement,
no? And what's the in the speaking, the interaction?
Interactive communication.
Sorry, I got the wrong way around. I've got too many things going on the screen. Is interactive communication, and there we do take that as a criterion in itself and look at how candidates are interacting with each other, and that some of that will be linguistic, some of that will be through gestures, through eye contact, etc. So bringing mediation in, I think, gives an extra dimension to what we're talking about when we're looking at communication.
Yes, I think it's just the emphasis, because when we look at criteria, when we look at activities, as you said, it is very difficult to tell the different modes of communication totally apart, because they rarely happen in isolation. So
exactly.
It makes sense.
And I mean, even in our exams as well, in the classroom, we very rarely focus in on one skill in isolation, and the way that we use language normally is, or naturally is, obviously using a combination of all the different skills. And you know, even in our listening tests, a lot of reading needs to occur. And as Victoria said, in the speaking test, we're listening and speaking at the same time. So, you know, there's obviously big overlap between all of these modes. But if we're thinking about breaking it down and trying to assess them fairly, then this is a nice approach, I think.
Yeah, definitely. I think it is a very clear way to show it. Okay.
So, over to you.
With
Ideas
the
in the
question.
chat box. There you go. What does mediation mean to you? What is mediation? Any ideas in the chat box? Synonyms or
we are talking here about mediation in general. Then we will little by little focus on mediation in LOMLOE and then mediation in primary. But when you think of mediation, what comes to mind?
Any words that you would associate with mediation or situations you'd associate with mediation?
If we don't get any answers, George, well,
nice.
here
No,
they are coming.
Everyone was typing at once. Problems, says Patricia. Arbitration, and David. Dialogue, negotiation. Impartial, neutral, very nice.
Helping
Negotiation of
solve
meaning.
problems.
Communication between people. Compromise, correction, problem solving. Excellent. Teaching.
Nice.
Lovely, lovely. Yeah, I think all of these are very closely related to mediation, or have mediation running as a thread through them. You had any ideas, Victoria? Co-working for Mediate, very nice.
Nice. Yes, no, I think these facilitate finding a common ground. All these words that have been mentioned in the chat box are very closely related to mediation. So what does the companion volume say about mediation? It is also quoted in the LOMLOE. Well, this is the definition. I'm going to give you a few seconds to read it, and then we will focus on a few parts of this definition. First of all, the learner becomes or acts as a social agent, which means that this learner is going to be identifying the gaps in communication where there is a problem, and is going to be creating bridges. So finding ways, finding strategies to solve these problems and help this communication. So contribute to this communication, constructing meaning, creating meaning, or just conveying this meaning.
Yeah, so that difference between sort of the creating bridges and then constructing and conveying meaning. So somebody who's going to be explaining, facilitating the understanding of messages, texts, ideas, concepts, using strategies such as paraphrasing or reformulating, but also perhaps developing an idea within that as well.
Yeah, and then another key aspect of this definition is that maybe we think of mediating from one language to another, but it is also possible to mediate within the same language. And this may be when we are, for example, mediating between different registers, but in other situations in which there is a misunderstanding and we need to find a common ground. We need to adapt our language to make sure the other person understands. Or
languaging. Have you heard about languaging, Victoria?
Can you explain, George?
Well, I don't know. I think when we're using language, not just to communicate a message, but to sort of develop or build up an idea, I think can be called languaging. So talking the idea through, articulating the thoughts, or the different aspects, or the build the idea, to try and facilitate understanding.
I think this is something that we usually do, right? Where we have an idea and we say, I don't know how to express it, and then you kind of start explaining, and then you find the words to finally express the idea. I think it has happened to us when we were writing webinars, for sure.
Oh, definitely.
It is something that
normally you translating my not very well expressed thoughts and ideas. Okay, so we've had to think about what mediation is. Now we'd like you to have a think about when is it needed. So again, thinking about mediation outside the classroom, your first interpretation of mediation, situations where mediation is needed.
And there you go, David. David shared with us a definition of languaging. Thank you.
Solving problems from Soledad, yes. Any more specific sort of real life situations or areas perhaps when mediation is needed to bridge the gap between teacherese and studentese? Very nice, Adnan.
Yeah, because I think that very often language is not the only reason why people have difficulty in understanding one another, right? Maybe it is due to cultural differences or different perspectives. So in all these situations, mediation is necessary.
Yeah, giving instructions, corrections, ideas, again, very classroom focused, differentiating diverse points of view. What did you come up with, Victoria? 3 more sort of real life outside the classroom areas. Yeah, peace processes, which again could happen in the classroom or the playground. Legal cases, legalese, actually, I just thought of because of the studentese and the teacherese. Is a very interesting way to use language to help mediate. And Victoria, child development.
Yeah, when we are trying to explain the world to children, of course, we need to adapt our language to make sure they understand. So this adaptation is already mediation. Okay, so we've talked about mediation in general and when it is needed, but how about mediation in LOMLOE and more precisely in primary? Well, the LOMLOE acknowledges that we live in societies which are culturally diverse. And in these societies, intercultural dialogue is necessary. So dialogue between people is necessary. But how do we adapt these to the primary context, which is, of course, going to be a reflection of society, but it is more limited. Well, 3 key aspects that are mentioned in LOMLOE, and I think are very useful when we are thinking about how to incorporate mediation in our classrooms, is thinking about familiar topics, familiar communicative situations that are relevant to our students, and where basic exchanges take place. So basic interactions, basic situations take place.
I mean, that's thinking in another language, I assume. Do you think, which are the sort of basic side of things? Yes. I mean, if the majority of your students will be what, A1, A2, maybe pushing up to B1 in primary, but mediation, you know, in L1 doesn't necessarily need to be, you know, that basic, I wouldn't say. It should be familiar and as relevant as possible, I think, like, you know, everything that happens within the classrooms.
Yeah.
But yeah, from now on, we will be looking at examples where we can pull mediation out or look at mediation within activities, etc. we're already doing. And most of these will be pitched at that sort of around A2, I think, Victoria. Do we go up a little bit into B1?
Yeah, I think we will definitely have room to talk about stretching the level a bit and going up to B1. There will also be some examples of activities for A1 or ideas of how to adapt the activity to a lower level. Some other aspects that we need to take into account: what are we asking students to do? What are we expecting of them? Well, they will have to, in order to mediate, they will be expected to process basic information and to also relay basic information. Again, because of what George just mentioned, because we are talking here about the foreign language. So I think we need to understand this in this context. And in order to do this, our students will need to use some strategies. that are suitable for their level. So the strategies that will be restricted to what students can do in primary, so probably adapting their language, and of course with our supports. And we need to make them aware of the fact that mediation involves a lot of empathy and respect. So we will also be talking about these values. Anything to add, George?
No, I don't think so, Victoria.
Great. So
let's move on to working on mediation and assessing it within the classroom. How are we already doing this in the classroom, Victoria? Any ideas?
Well, I think we are going to when we look at the mediation activities and strategies that appear in the Council of Europe, I think they are going to remind us of a lot of the activities and the tasks that we already do in the classroom.
We would like to take this opportunity to apologise for the 2 or 3 spelling mistakes in this, but it's straight from the Council of Europe, so you can blame them. Maybe a small prize if you can spot the 3 spelling mistakes, but no, concentrate on Victoria. Mediating a text, Victoria.
Yes, there are 3 main categories of mediation activities. Mediating a text. What does this mean? So passing on to another language user, so another student, the content of a text which they do not have access to. Okay, so you can also mediate for yourself if you are taking notes, but also if you are expressing reaction to texts, for example, a story, as we will see later on. So it's just this, so passing on the information from a text. And then
mediating concepts, so helping facilitate access to knowledge, concepts, ideas for others, particularly as with the text, if they're unable to access this directly on their own. So a lot of teaching, one would hope, involves the mediation of concepts. And lastly?
And the last one is mediating communication. And this involves the facilitating the understanding and shaping successful communication between learners. So taking into account all the potential differences that they may have, different perspectives, different cultures, different backgrounds. Of course, this needs to be adapted to the primary situation. These mediation activities go from pre-A1 all the way up to C2. So what we are going to be looking at now is how we can select the activities that are more suitable for primary students, their needs and their abilities. And George, the mediation strategies?
So the strategies that they will be using to carry out these activities. In primary, students will only be ready to use some of these effectively, and we have to be realistic, have a look at this closely and decide which of these are appropriate for us. But strategies to try and explain a new concept, and strategies to help simplify a text. So some overlap with what we were speaking about earlier, things like rephrasing, paraphrasing. Again, at A1 and A2, we're not expecting the world of our students, but it's good to bear these strategies in mind when planning our activities and trying to pull out that thread of mediation through them.
Okay, so this is mediation activities and strategies. What about assessment, George?
You tell me, Victoria. It's a very nice looking funnel you've got there.
You like it? I like the corner.
I like it very much. So, we're talking really about formative and summative assessment. They can both add information that can help adapt the learning and teaching of students, adapting to their needs and helping their progress. Obviously, summative happens less frequently and will potentially have the ability to inform what will happen in the next cycle or the next academic year, whereas more formative, ongoing formative assessment should be helping inform the teacher and adjust what you are doing sort of every step of the way. All the levels of, or both types of assessment can and should contribute to both the effectiveness of the learning and the reliable evaluation of our students' outcomes. There's a lot of focus in LOMLOE on formative assessment, much greater. Well, I think it's taking a much bigger or more explicitly described bigger role now than perhaps before.
Mm-hmm. And George, I was thinking effectiveness of learning and also of teaching, right? Because if we are, if we have some kind of feedback of where the students are, to what extent they are comfortable with the content we have covered and the skills we have practiced, then we can decide to move on maybe a bit more quickly or devote a bit more time to what we were covering.
Yeah.
So this is also going to have an impact on our teaching, of course.
And so the three sort of key areas that, you know, assessment, whether it be summative or formative, will be focusing on, Victoria?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the three main areas are identifying the learning needs, precisely that. So if we can move on a bit more quickly, if we need to spend a bit more time, evaluating progress, so to what extent our students are progressing, and also helping us make decisions to promote continued learning. So if we see that our students are a bit weaker at listening, for example, give them some extra practice with that, or maybe directing them towards doing this a bit more at home with self-study material. In primary, it is a bit more difficult, but there are also just ways to supplement what we are covering in class. And the
mediation
good news, George,
is hopefully, yep, good news. Mediation is particularly well suited to classroom assessment. So we're going to start now having a look at some of those mediation activities that we looked at before in more detail and relating those to more specific examples. And as we're going through, we'll try and establish a link between the activities and the can-do statements that we looked at earlier at the different levels. Mm-hmm. So take it away, Victoria.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to mention that actually in LOMLOE, the link between the can-do statements and the levels of the CFR is clear. Okay, they base their assessment criteria on the Common European Framework, but of course adapted to the student needs and their profiling in primary. Okay, so let's get started, George. We're going to start with note-taking. And this is a can-do statement taken from the companion volume. At A2, students can make simple notes at a presentation or demonstration where the subject matter is familiar. Again, we are talking here about a low level A2, so familiar, predictable situations is what we are going to be covering.
And again, what it says at the end about the presenter allowing for clarification and note-taking. So you've got to think about that to some degree as well with when considering the input. Some limitations for lower levels, slower, clearer speech, pauses, built-in pauses to take notes when necessary, though through clearly articulated, well-structured texts or lectures. And in terms of the type of note-taking, Victoria?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we will be expecting them to take notes as a series of points, and then at higher levels we will be asking students to select the most appropriate content for their audience. So
exactly.
For the person.
So as the levels increase, we would expect students to be able to make decisions on what to omit, what to include, etc. Whereas At A2, it's all going to be very structured, very clear. They will be directed towards, you know, the information that they need to take down.
Yeah.
As we can see
here, where is this, George?
Well, this is actually taken from one of our. I think this is taken from Movers
A1 Movers.
Yeah, A1 Movers. Throughout the rest of this, we are using some Cambridge exam tasks to illustrate what we are saying about mediation. All of these are available to download for free from the respective teachers' handbooks. I think somebody might be able to put a link in. There are free teachers' handbooks for each one of our exams. So pre-A1 starters, A1 movers, A2 flyers, A2 key, B1 preliminary. You can download all of these to use in class, and that's why we've gone with them. So this is a part 2 from the listening at A1, Victoria, and what are students expected to do?
Well, they will listen to a text, a short text, and they need to find the relevant information to fill in the gaps. So as you can see, we are going to ask them to come up with numbers and then food. So basically the topics that we are expecting that they can be familiar with at this level.
And as you can see, familiar, relevant, very well structured, with visual support as well. At this level, where we expect them to write a name, which you can see in item number 1, that name is always spelled out. I don't know what the answer is. What is it, Victoria? Jungle, paradise, jungle, I don't know. But they will always be spelled out at A1 and A2. I think when names are given, they're always spelled out explicitly. And I think it's important to say, we were talking about slow and clear speech. We do, even with our young learners, sort of pre-A1 and A1, it is slow and clear, but it's never unnaturally slow. We don't record anything like that. Okay, we always make sure that the speech that they are, or the input text that they're listening to are delivered as naturally as possible, but obviously bearing in mind clarity, speed, etc.
So this is the description of the task, and what are we expecting our students to do? What do they need to do at this level and in this task, George?
Well, they're processing very basic information. They will have time. I mean, in an exam situation, they have 20 seconds, maybe slightly longer, but before they hear the audio. So they should be using that time to process the information on the task itself. And then when they are listening, processing that information and relaying, filling in the gaps, relaying that basic information thereafter.
Yes. This is the task itself, but then we always suggest that there is some preparation, especially in the classroom. There is some preparation stage, so students can become interested in the task, start activating the vocabulary that they will later need to use and they will hear in the recording. So there will be some rephrasing going on for sure when we are asking students, what's the name of the zoo? What do you think? How many different kinds of animals? There will also be rephrasing on our side and on their side as well. And also, George, I think you suggested also in the follow-up activity, right? When we are correcting and also when we are maybe expanding a bit more the activity.
Yeah, I mean, there are lots of different ways you could extend this. It depends how you do the feedback. If you did the feedback sort of in class orally, you would be asking questions. You will notice on the task that this is all in note form. They aren't full sentences. Name of zoo, number of different kinds, can give food to. So as Victoria said, either in the lead in or the lead out, we'll be playing with that language, reformulating it, either through speaking activities, or you could ask them, you know, for homework potentially to, you know, write write four or five sentences about the zoo using this information would be a very easy way to extend this activity. So again, we're reformulating, rephrasing, and tapping into that sort of competence in linguistic communication. Group work as well.
Yeah, group work, if we are giving students some extra time, maybe to try and predict some of the answers that they may hear. But also I think these learning to learn, because they will have to manage their time, right, George? This is something that they will need to learn, that they will have a limited amount of time to go through the task.
I mean, but as Victoria said, I mean, dealing with this for the first time in class and what we like to call scaffolding. If you're working towards an exam, for example, I think it's very useful to start with the task, something like this, and really break it down into as many stages as possible. Make it a very natural sort of building up to finally being able to do the task. So by the time they get to the exam, it's just like doing something in class. But having a well thought through, clearly planned lead-in stage and lead-out is always very useful, and will feed into that sort of learning to learn competency.
Okay, so moving on to another mediation activity. In this case, is processing a text in speech or in writing. And here we can see a kind of statement from A1. You see again that we are going to be looking at conveying simple, predictable information in short, very simple signs and notices, posters or programs. So again, a very limited range of input or material that our students are going to be covering, to make it suitable to their level as well and their abilities. And here we have two examples of, well, it's really the same task. Here, an exam task from A to Key for schools, and then if you want to introduce some more authentic material, you can take photos of signs and notices and then bring them to class and create your own activity here.
It's really nice for sort of classroom rules, classroom management. You can have posters up and get students creating their own posters and putting them up around the classroom. Did you ever do that, Victoria?
Yes, I think it is a good idea. And it helps, helps them to learn and remember the rules and the instructions. So definitely useful.
So again, we're asking our students here to, process basic information. Again, it's very familiar and relevant. It's structured, and yeah, you can either do something sort of, very related to the classroom, like I just mentioned, or, expand.
Yes, and if you want to maybe stretch a bit the level, you can ask students to explain why, to justify their answers with a classmate, or if they are ready for it, to the rest of the class. So that explanation is for sure going to bring in some rephrasing and some reformulation, and this is again going to contribute to the mediation, but also to the linguistic competency.
Yeah, I mean, justifying the answers, justifying why one answer is correct, also justifying why the two incorrect answers are incorrect. And a nice way to stretch this further, Victoria, with your stronger students. Maybe
changing the notice or the sign, so the correct answer is no longer correct and the correct answer is a distractor.
Exactly. Very easy way to extend that activity.
Yeah, and as we said, if we are, this can be an individual activity, but if we ask students to work in pairs, justifying their answers, then we are also tapping into the C5 key competency, working on personal, social, and learning to learn. Okay, moving on to mediating concepts now, George.
So the can-do statement we think is most appropriately linked to this is, as you can see at A2, can ask what somebody thinks of a certain idea.
Yeah, because when I saw this activity encouraging conceptual talk, I was like, this is quite a lot, maybe for primary, but you can see how it can be adapted to lower levels with this can-do statement. And this is the activity that we are going to suggest for this, George.
Yep, this is taken from our A2 key for schools, and it's a new part at the end of the speaking test, and it's where we're really giving students an opportunity to interact with each other.
Yeah, and here what they have to do is just say whether they like the different hobbies or not, working in pairs, so expressing their opinion, and also if possible asking their partner for their own opinion. Our students are likely to need a bit of support for this, although we can see that again the task is quite structured and the topic is familiar and relevant to them. But if we give them some extra support, then it will be easier for them to be better prepared to do it.
A really nice, easy way to give extra support for this, I think, is the next slide, isn't it, Victoria? Yeah. What have we done here?
Yeah, then we have given them some, or ideally we've asked them beforehand to come up with positive and negative adjectives about that could go with these hobbies. So they have these ready for them to use in the task, and to tap into mediation, we can also give them some of the questions. They can come up with them, and then we can give them some extra ones for them to be ready to feel more comfortable and feel that they are more in control of the activity.
Again, giving them as much of the language that they'll need to support them, and then gradually, again, as we said before, sort of taking that support away step by step. This took us quite a long time earlier. It was very difficult coming up with a negative adjective for reading. So I think Victoria's first one was boring. I said, you can't say reading's boring. So in the end, we came up with expensive.
You made the table better, George, for sure.
Slightly. Well, there was a double boring, wasn't there? Reading and painting. Yes. But we would suggest giving students that grid to work on, you know, again, in pairs or in groups, come up with a selection of positive and negative adjectives. Support them in the brainstorming of the language that they then will use in a more contained exercise.
Yes, and then George, we also have the self-assessment table. Well, this is a part of it, because really sometimes, well, it is useful to make students aware in a way that they can understand of the aspects that they are covering and how they are improving. So this reflection stage may be at the end of the activity to check whether their partner or themselves actually even did or were working on mediation, and just asking them to make a comment or give an example I think it is a useful time to devote to this.
Yeah, and as Victoria said, it's getting them more aware of you know, what is happening when they are doing an activity like this. We've used these sort of self-assessment checklists or success criteria for, well, in lots of other contexts. with the rest of that, we took the sort of Cambridge speaking criteria, which is designed and written for speaking examiners and teachers. But you've got to take that, extract the main ideas, and then try and reformulate it, try and mediate the concepts, Victoria, in appropriate language for your students. So always bear in mind, you know, the sort of level of your students' language, and try and get them engaging with these with the concepts within these criteria from an as early an age as possible. I think is really useful, and will help them improve their speaking as they go on.
Yeah, they're speaking, and we also have them for writing. George, sorry, I don't know if you mentioned that. Yeah, so yeah, just adding these success criteria, the self-assessment opportunity. And by doing this, by giving the additional support with the questions, the adjectives, and the self-assessment table, we are tapping into the competency in linguistic communication, and then the personal, social, and learning to learn. Because that way they will be better equipped to engage in communicative situations.
And being more aware of what they're doing, what their partners are doing.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Okay, moving on to expressing a personal response to creative texts, so mediating a text. And here we can see a progression from A1 to A2, from using simple words and phrases to say how a work made them feel, to say whether they liked a work or not, and explain why, again in simple language.
And taking what Mark was speaking about last week.
Yeah.
Can you talk us through this, Victoria?
Yeah, this was covered in our previous session with our colleagues Mark and Rachel, and this is just an example of the type of activities, stories that you can find in your course books, and how you can use them to be working on a lot of different competencies. So there you go. You have here the activity with some questions, but we can ask for our students' point of view, opinion, and also for them to have a more active role in the activity, asking questions about the characters, the setting, the plot, the theme, with WH questions. So this way, I think students are going to engage more deeply. I don't know if you can say that, George, but they are going to engage more with the story, and they are likely to take a lot more from it.
Exactly, and it's just adding on to the sort of the step-by-step approach that Mark and Rachel went through last time. Just adding in moments of reflection, I think, really getting students really, talking about how they feel about the characters, about the setting, the plot, the theme, just adding in that extra stage of reflection and giving them an opportunity to express, their feelings and their reactions to the text in hand.
Yeah, that's true, because if you ask them just like, what did you think of the story, or what did you think of the text, maybe they don't have that many ideas, but if you are asking them about these specific aspects, I'm sure that they will have something to say, and that will help them in the future come up with ideas for other activities.
Exactly, and start with this sort of who, what, when, where approach, but then build. So we're thinking about, bridging that gap between, more lower order and higher order. So it's like the typical, did you understand? Which you should never ask. You should always ask questions which demonstrate which in answering them, students will have to show that they do understand. And so it's just thinking about the way that we're questioning, the way we're structuring, building up from this.
Yeah, and then also I like these two questions, again, taken from this session, because this is going to help them with their creativity, right? They need to really think about the situation that they are reading, and then try to to bring in their own ideas.
And again, moving from that when, what was it? Where they're all W's, but I've forgotten.
Yes.
What were they? Go back a slide. Who, what, where, when. Moving up from that to how and why. I think will help develop those and that jump from lower order to higher order as well. And as David said, yeah, never ask your students, do you know what I mean? Do you know what I mean? Or try not to. Not too frequently anyway.
Okay, then just other resources that you can use here, as well as a written text. You can also use videos if your students like them. And then we're going to suggest some other ideas very close to what our colleagues mentioned. We can start just by giving them the title, in this case, the Cold Planet, and ask them what they think the story will be about, and then have some time for brainstorming and get our students' ideas. And then once they have
and develop that even further, just give them a title, get them brainstorming there, give them an image, another stage of brainstorming, and then maybe put some music on. Nice,
very nice
multimodal input as well.
Yeah.
And once they have discussed that,
then we
feed
can
them information.
Exactly, yes. We can add that the main characters are a dog, an alien, and a boy. Which is maybe, well, the alien and the boy maybe, but the dog is something that maybe they were not thinking about or considering.
Well, unless they knew you were involved, Victoria.
Yes. Have you noticed how many dogs have been able to squeeze in the
You've got quite a lot, although I'm surprised there isn't a dog on this slide. A picture of a dog at least. But congratulations, Victoria, congratulations. Moving on.
Well, just to mention that this is somehow tapping into the competency 7, because it is based on creativity and problem solving. So they need to come with an alternative version of the story, just because maybe they weren't expecting to have a dog in it.
Well done, Victoria. Yeah, another really nice way to get students working creatively is this Make Beliefs comics, which Victoria found last year, I think.
Yes, if your students like drawing, then great, they can draw, but if not, they can go on these websites, and then they have lots of pictures they can combine to create their own story. We suggest that they do this in groups, and this will be also tapping into their personal and social and learning to learn competency.
And then a follow-on activity from that
is to write their story. Okay, so they came up with their story in pictures, images, and then they will have to put their ideas into words. And once they've done that, again, we suggest maybe doing this with collaborative writing to get maybe some additional support from partners and classmates, and then slowly, little by little, be removing this support. And then once they have their story, they can watch the initial story, and then original, yes, and then they can give their feedback. They can say, express it with a face, how the story,
Victoria,
with their emoji. Yes,
you're so old, Victoria. You're so old and out of touch.
Well, I'm just thinking of the classroom, face-to-face classroom. They can use their faces, but yes, they can also use emojis. Why not? To show how the story made them feel, and maybe explain it with words as a follow-up activity. So again, stretching a bit the level depending on your student's level, and asking these questions. So did you like the story? Were there any surprises? Did you like the end? And how comparing their two stories, maybe this is a bit more more difficult. And as our colleagues from the press suggest, we have some activity cards, and a very nice follow-up would be to ask why. Okay, so asking students to work in pairs and keep asking why, so students can develop their ideas a bit more.
I used to do that a lot when I was little. One of my parents tried to make a rule that they would never say just because it is, because I would always, it was just endless. But why? And if your students aren't doing this already, force them to do it in this wonderful activity. Moving on, Victoria, I just like to clarify for the audience, I am considerably older than Victoria, which is why I'm allowed to say what I said earlier. I'm not bullying her. Moving on, back to our grid.
Okay, back to grid, and now we are going to talk about relaying specific information. Yes, are we right? Yes, relaying specific information in speech and in writing. And again, we have the can-do statement. So what we can expect from of students at A1 and at A2. So simple, predictable information about times, places in short and simple texts or messages. And at A2, again, short, clear, simple messages, but a bit more open to instructions, announcements, and always with the limitation that they are expressed slowly and clearly. Okay, and we have an idea for an activity, but also an idea for something that I'm sure that you always do this in class, probably every day. So asking students to, once you have explained an activity, remind the rest of the class of the instructions for the activity to make sure that they have understood, and also asking class or students to tell the classroom rules or the rules for the activity or for the interaction. Something very useful and something that is necessary especially with some groups of students. I'm thinking of
laying down the ground rules
yes.
early on. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Another very nice simple speaking activity, perhaps for our lower students. I mean, this comes from oh no, sorry, I got confused. I thought it was something else. Find someone who activity, which I've used with all ages and levels. Victoria.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and here we just ask our students to find someone who has done these activities and expanding it a bit, asking them to tell them about it. Okay, so maybe 3 sentences, 2 sentences, at least 2 sentences. So there is a bit of adaptation for students with different levels of ability. And then asking students to share it with the rest of the class. So what did your partner tell you? That way they are relaying the message.
Yeah, you can do this as a very nice big mingle activity, and then relay the information once mingle is done.
Mm-hmm. Okay, oops. Oops. So that's it. That's all we have, all the activities that we had for today. And well, we hope you can see that, or we hope we have covered everything that we promised to cover at the beginning of the session. So
and I hope we just made it clear that you are all already doing a lot of mediation in your classroom activities everywhere. So it was really just to sort of highlight that and then bring it back and show how mediation does already run as a thread through many of the things that we're already doing in class.
Yeah, it is nothing new, right? It's just like thinking about it, having this in mind,
bearing it in mind, being aware. Yeah. Exactly. So any questions from the floor? Before we finish? Well, questions in the chat box, if there are any. In the meantime, Victoria?
Yeah, in the meantime, please don't miss our next webinars. If you want to check the upcoming ones, please scan this QR code, and Mark has put the link in the chat box. Thank you, Mark. You will also be able to watch the previous webinars. If they are not there yet, they will be very soon, so please check it out.
And the survey, Victoria.
Yes, please, please, we want to hear your feedback. So please take a moment to complete the feedback form for today. And that way you will also be able to get your certificate of attendance.
And your feedback is really important because it helps, it helps us put together sessions which are useful for you. I'm not sure, do we have one more LOMLOE before Christmas, or is this the last one?
No, this is the last one, and then we will have a few more later.
Exactly, after Christmas, and focusing a bit more on secondary. So it'd be great to have as much feedback as possible in advance of those. Okay. Yeah,
please just share any area you would like us to cover. As George mentioned, anything you can tell us as much detail as possible, so the sessions are useful and relevant. And yeah, Mark said, thank you, Mark, that we will be looking at formative evaluation, mediation, and we are looking forward to your feedback for the rest of the sessions.
Excellent. Well, thank you all very much. I hope it was useful, and have a lovely Christmas if we don't see you in any further webinars before then, and we'll see you in the new year.
Yep. Thank you.
Thanks.